Most of us know the physical sensation of shame. It's that sudden, isolating drop in the stomach, accompanied by a quiet but certain belief that there is something inherently wrong with who we are. What makes this so devastating is that the tools we use to build a life, our intelligence and our ability to imagine, are the exact same mechanisms that can freeze into rigidity and fracture our sense of self. This feeling usually presents itself as a character flaw, but if we look closer, it begins to look like a misunderstanding of how our psychological boundaries are actually organized. We take the natural, functional lines that define us and treat them as impenetrable walls. But those lines were never meant to be barriers. They are seams, places where two things meet so that an experience can happen. To understand how we become trapped in this perspective, we have to trace the logic back to the root. We need to look at the mechanics of how human consciousness first begins to process the world. Before the mind can understand anything, it has to draw a line. To process reality, consciousness has to take an unbroken universe and divide it into distinct pieces. This handwritten note maps out how these mental divisions cascade into human suffering. It starts with the baseline capacities: consciousness, intelligence, and imagination. These capacities allow the mind to make the first cut. It splits reality right down the middle, creating a watcher on one side and the thing being watched on the other. This creates duality. It is a necessary perspective that allows us to navigate the physical world, to distinguish our own bodies from the objects around us. As this observation loop repeats, the watcher watches itself watching. That recursive loop eventually stabilizes into a permanent identity, the Jungian ego. Having a solid I is biologically useful for survival. It allows us to track our interests and protect our bodies, but it also creates a target, a single fixed point that can be wounded. The moment the I solidifies, it creates a psychological surface area. It defines a specific edge where the self ends and the rest of the world begins. Because that surface area exists, pain acquires a specific address. A physical sensation becomes a personal injury. The ego naturally flinches away from that injury. It recoils, trying to defend its borders against the ache. This flinching is the birth of shame. It's the moment an action is pulled inward and rewritten as an identity. We enter a state of cognitive fusion. The awareness of a mistake becomes entirely fused with the identity of the person who made it. There is a difference between the observation, "I notice I made a mistake," and the conclusion, "I am a mistake." We can see that shift recorded at the bottom of the map. The sequence falls from the self, to pain, to shame, and finally to illusion and delusion. The useful tool of duality has curdled into a distorted view of reality. Delusion is the act of taking that functional, temporary boundary and building a permanent fortress on it, one that eventually traps you inside. This is the cascade of the self. Simple awareness leads to a division of the world, which hardens into an identity that eventually unintentionally traps itself. But there is a counterpoint to this trap. If you turn and press your hand against that heavy psychological wall, you find that it gives. The error is in treating the ego as a noun, as a solid, unmoving object. In reality, the self is an active verb. It is the continuous, ongoing action of distinguishing. The goal isn't necessarily to destroy the ego. We need those distinctions to live. The goal is to see those distinctions for what they are, useful but not absolute. A wall is a barrier that isolates. A seam is a permeable meeting place. It is a point of contact that allows experience to happen. Recognizing your edges as a seam shifts the perspective on shame. It suggests that the rigid, isolated boundaries we were desperate to protect were always a process in motion, a way of being in the world, rather than a wall that keeps us out of it.